Hello everyone, Lexi Velica in voiceover here to talk about journaling again. This time we're talking about my personal experience with journaling as well as art and how it all feeds into my personal philosophy of bad art that I'm always talking people's ears off every little opportunity I get. Also, if my voice sounds a little bit strange, I spent the past 2 days talking my friend's ear off about pathologic and other things, so I am a little bit rusty on the vocal cords. But to begin, journaling was something that I always really fancied the idea of, but I never really found myself able to commit to it outside of really brief attempts that were always ruined by small disruptions in my really unstable routine. I didn't really journal as a kid either. I don't really have any memories of keeping journals, just notebooks that I would do creative writing and world building projects in. I never really did anything that was keeping track of my activities and the things that I did each day. And I was really quick to not use those planners that they would give us at the beginning of each school year. I was really eager almost to find the first possible opportunity to stop using it. I didn't even have the delusions at the beginning of the year that I was going to actually use it this time for real. Only when I was in high school that I would sometimes pick up a habit of journaling in really quickly discarded individual Word documents and later Google Docs. This was mostly for venting purposes when writing poetry wasn't enough. And the closest thing I had to journaling though in my teenage years was probably my Tumblr blog. And I took that very seriously. I did everything I could to cultivate an as accurate a reflection as possible of myself and my interests. And this wasn't just through personal posts or text posts talking about my life or things that were on my mind. A lot of it was through cultivating the perfect images or audio posts or anything that would kind of accurately capture who I was as a person and communicate that to the world. So it wasn't as private as journaling tends to be. Ironic that I'm emphasizing the privacy, having a journaling channel now where I share a lot of my journals and my journaling process. But I think that journaling at its core has some elements of the personal that is intended usually to be kept to oneself. And even this journaling that I am sharing right now with everyone is limited in scope. I'm not showing you everything because ultimately this process is intended to serve me and my needs as a person. And then art-wise, I really passively and casually engaged with drawing my entire life. I was not really a kid that did a lot of drawing or was known for drawing. I was usually an accessory to another friend that was really the artist friend and known for drawing, and I would draw because I was influenced by them. I was known for being a bit crafty though, to the point that a lot of my gifts as a kid were craft related, but usually they were applied hyper-specific forms of crafting. When I was a kid, my aspiration was to become a fashion designer. So I had a lot of those kits that were included all these stencils of clothing and these bases of models that you would draw onto. And a lot of scrapbooky style things were common among the gifts I would receive and would play with a lot of the time as a kid. But the passive, casual way that I would mostly engage with art was doodling in the margins of my school notes when I really wasn't supposed to be, and not really putting much effort into anything that I drew. I was genuinely very allergic to putting in too much effort because I was really afraid that the bad outcome of my art would mean something about me personally, that I was a bad person almost, or I was a failure. I just was not fated to be good at things. The only times that I would really try with any amount of effort outside of really brief inspired periods where I was determined to get better at art, and usually in a very disorganized way. I never sought out books or formal resources. I had no proper training or anything other than the occasional how to draw a manga book that I was gifted when I got into manga. But the only times I would truly try was to draw my original characters that I would role play online. and because that was my primary creative outlet for most of my life. I really fancied myself to be a writer first and foremost, and someone who was good at words. Ever since I was given the compliments for the first time that I was articulate, I kind of took that and ran as far as I could. Well, not exactly far enough. I'm not a writer, and I have no aspirations of being a professional writer other than eventually publishing my book, self-publishing that is, as well as other like written word creative pursuits that I have on the back burner. As far as journaling goes, like proper journaling, my roots originate in bullet journaling. At the tail end of college, I got super into YouTube videos about journaling. This coincided with my resurgence in a love of reading, and I was particularly taken by people's reading journals and how they would have these beautiful spreads and this beautiful, like, structured way of processing the books that they read and taking notes on them and documenting it in a way that I found really enticing. I had a really big fixation of sorts on having documentation for my life in ways that weren't strictly journaling, because I had also had this little bit of, let's say, prejudice against journaling. I thought journaling was one of those things that just didn't work and wouldn't work for me. Sort of also one of those things that people would suggest as like a cure for mental illness, alongside like diet, exercise, meditation, this kind of repetitive advice that I would be given at every turn that would just make me roll my eyes, because it's not that simple in any way. But seeing this alternate form of journaling and these funky dotted notebooks really appealed to me. So I spent the limited money that I had at the time to get a bullet journal, as well as some washi tapes and some highlighters, to kind of try to copy some of the spreads that I saw and then eventually develop some of my own. I had a regular bullet journal that I would use for planning purposes because I was at college at the time and I needed some way to kind of organize myself and be able to figure out how I could be more productive with my assignments, even though I was at the time unmedicated for ADHD, so I was really struggling. And then I also started a reading journal because, again, reading was like the catalyst for getting me into journaling and discovering this whole journaling side of YouTube. I ended up dropping the practice eventually for a long time due to health issues. Funnily enough, there's a little bit of environmental storytelling to it. In one of my bullet journals, you can see that I gradually started putting less effort into my spreads and including less information. And at one point, I have a note that says, "I feel better now. I'm going to stop taking my medication." And the rest of the pages after that are completely blank, which is really funny to me, but also terribly sad. But I only ended up picking up the practice of bullet journaling again when I started a really stressful full-time office job, and I needed something to kind of keep track of all the things that I had to do because the workplace was super disorganized and I was constantly stressed because no one seemed to have a system for doing anything. So I got a new dotted notebook and would use that exclusively for work-related things, and didn't really let that seep into aspects of my personal life. It kind of developed an association of being a strictly work thing that I would do in like a productivity and functionality sort of mindset. I wasn't really getting creative with spreads. I kept up my same structured layout for all of my pages, and it was also an excuse to do something other than work that was like vaguely productive, or at least I could spin as being productive if I was caught doing it. I did have a lot of time where didn't have tasks, but I was too fearful of being accused of not being productive and not working. So it was beneficial to me to have something that I could pretend to be doing something beneficial. Personal journaling eventually came back into my life as I started doing mood tracking through the app Dailyo. I did this because I wanted to try to get a better grasp on my own mental health and my moods and figure out what activities were correlated with what moods of mine and see if there's any way that I could figure out how to influence my emotions, let's say, by doing more of activities that seem to be consistently associated with a happier version of me. I also got into Notion and doing Notion journaling at the time, where it was the first time that I was actually able to commit to a habit of writing about my days. I did attempt to pick up Notion one time before all this, but I was also very addicted to an MMO at the time. So my days ended up being, when I broke down the activities that I was doing, morning ritual stuff, and then straight into many hours of playing an MMO, and it felt really depressing. But when I was working that job, I really needed an outlet and a place where I could complain that wasn't my partner at the time. So the journaling on Notion really lent itself well as a useful tool and outlet for me. Art journaling came into my life when I had a really sad Halloween and I decided to play Night in the Woods because it was very autumnal and I thought it would help get me into the mood more and make me feel less down about not having a great Halloween. And as I was playing the game, I was really charmed by the doodle journal that the main character May had. I really liked that she just did these honestly crappy little doodles about anything related to things going on in her day and those events that happen in the game. And I thought, I want to do something like that. So I went to the art store and picked up a sketchbook at full price. It was important that it was full price so I would be able to guilt myself based on how much I spent on it in order to keep myself with the habit and doing it. And I committed to just doing a silly little doodle every single day. I would do just anything that I could. I tried to keep it very easy on myself and not try to push myself that hard. I would do a small doodle and then write the date, and that was the minimum. That was important was I just did something creative. I produced something that could be called a drawing every single day, and whether I wrote something with it or not didn't really matter. I was kind of getting my fix mostly with my Notion journaling, but I wasn't the most consistent with it at this stage. Consistency would only come a bit later on. But I really kept up with it. I kept journaling, and I eventually developed a style where I would use washi tape because I had some washi tape back from my bullet journaling days. I would use that to decorate the pages, and I eventually came up with a structure where I would put a line of washi tape across like the full width of the page, and then I would use this plain solid color washi tape to write the date and what day of the week it was, and then just fill out all the other stuff that I could with the page with just doodles and drawings. I got into the habit of drawing myself every single day. And I also would write down what media I was, for lack of a better word, again, consuming, as well as like my little thoughts on it if I had any. And I kept going with this art journal. I kept doing drawings in entry drawings every single day. And on the 3rd of October, 2022, I started a new volume with a renewed purpose. I was so proud of myself for having finished a book. I had never finished a sketchbook or any kind of like dedicated art book before. This was the first time. And I made a vow to myself that I would be allowed to take art seriously and permit myself to become an artist and pursue what I really wanted. I wouldn't be shy about describing myself as an artist anymore. I wouldn't try to like dance around it or just say it was just something that I did on the side. I would be allowed for the first time to make it something that was my main thing, that I could describe myself as being and earnestly want to pursue because I'd proved something to myself. And I've been keeping up the practice. I am currently on my 8th volume of my art journal, but this volume also wasn't without difficulty. I had my first break in art journaling in the entire history of me doing it. I got through 960 days until the death of my grandmother caused me to stop journaling for a bit over a month. All the rest of the end of June and all of July of this year. But I have since picked up the practice again, and I'm really determined to make it better than ever and be much more expressive with it. I kind of ended up in a bit of a slump for the past year with my art journaling. I noticed a stark decline in the quality of my drawings, and I was falling back into the previous traps of being allergic to putting effort into my artwork. And I wanted to do everything I could to correct that and not let myself fall down when I know that I could do so much better. And this is where my philosophy of bad art comes into play. So I've talked about this numerous times in many different places, and honestly, I'll never stop talking about it until I'm dead. You give me the slightest bit of an opportunity to talk about my feelings on bad art and making bad art and my general philosophy on making art, and I'm going to start talking your ear off about this very same thing. Even if I'm spouting the same exact words, it doesn't matter. I really like hearing myself talk most of the time, so I'm definitely going to keep going at it. So I was never really one truly for perfectionism, but I was really often struck into stasis by terrible maelstroms of feeling over the notion of being bad at things for the longest time. I had this really strong complex about putting effort into things and really favored not trying at all as a method of protecting myself when something turned out poorly. This all changed when I came into my philosophy of bad art, inspired by the same source of my journaling inspiration, Night in the Woods, given that I was inspired by a aforementioned crappy doodle journal, and also this fantastic video essay that I'll link in the description entitled The Dialectics of Rick and Morty by CJ the X, which contains a phenomenal section on killing your perfectionistic impulses. I really didn't expect that, of all things that would change my life and change my thoughts on art and how I approach the creative process, would be a Rick and Morty video essay, but sometimes inspiration and change come from strange sources. In essence, you really get nowhere by daydreaming about making things and not making things, and only through making a deluge of awful things can you ever hope to be good at making things. The first thing that you ever make is inevitably going to be not that great, at least not compared to the things that you will make in the future after you gain experience and you make mistakes and you learn what works and what doesn't and how you operate as a creative person. And if you aspire to make good things right off the bat, you're just doomed for failure. By making bad art, you are leagues ahead of the version of you that refuses to do anything at all. Bad art is not a stain on who you are as a person, it's a glorious sign of your willingness to make mistakes in the name of learning. As long as you invest a reasonable amount of effort you are capable of investing, you should be proud of having partaken in the act of creation. And this applies to all kinds of art, it's not just visual art, anything created that constitutes as making something, even journaling. Making bad art is really good for you. It supports the principle of kindness and allows you to enjoy the creative process more without caring as much about the final results. And bad art, anyways, is really subjective, just as any other kind of art. What you might deem to be bad art that you've created is perfect to someone else perceiving it. You will almost always be your worst critic because you have the unfortunate disadvantage of self-awareness in many cases. And no matter how hard you beat the perfectionist impulse into submission, it can rear its ugly head in part to disrupt your activities. And this is why you shouldn't fall victim to comparison either, especially not with what other people deem to be their own bad art. Furthermore, while making bad art, refrain from too often calling your art bad, though, when sharing it with others. For this type of self-deprecation can really do you no favors. People won't look as kindly upon your art, and they might start feeling bad about their own art when they get to comparing it to their own. It just drags everyone down. And if something is worth doing and it involves inflicting no harm on others, it's worth doing poorly if the alternative is doing nothing at all. The bottom line really is just do it. You're not going to get anywhere until you start doing it and making art. At the bare minimum, just make something. Something, anything is better than nothing. Scribbles on a page, nonsense keyboard smashing, a few random disparate words that don't have any connotation or association with each other. Anything, no matter what your medium is, anything is better than a blank page or an empty space. All you really need to do is just start, and the rest of it will be easier. Because you know in the end that no matter what you create, you're a lot better off than if you didn't make anything at all. This was honestly a lot more concise than I thought it would be, but I think that after talking about this subject so many times, I've got it down to a little bit of an exact science about how to most cleanly and clearly get my point across. I might make another video on this subject in the future, expanding on my thoughts and talking about more about my general art philosophy, especially as it pertains to journaling. But for now, thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day and talk to you guys soon.